We're recording. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're back again with another COVID-19 challenge webinar, courtesy of ISPI SoCal. Today, our content is a little different than what we've done in past months. Before we've interviewed people who've empowered their employees and their staff to work from home, and they've talked about solving problems that come with COVID-19. But today we're going to talk with one of our chapter board members, Suresh Radhakrishnan, who had to go to India in March for a family funeral and found himself quarantined in India starting in late March and ending 145 days later, late summer. He's now back with us in sunny California, but he has certainly experienced the COVID-19 challenge in different circumstances than you and I. Suresh, I hand it over to you.
Good morning, or almost good afternoon, I guess now. I am going to start sharing my screen here so that you can see where I was a little bit and what I was going through. So as Miller was saying, I was 10,000 miles away almost in southern India. And when the COVID lockdown started, I originally went there because my father-in-law had passed away. My wife was already there. She'd been there for a few weeks. And about a week before we were scheduled to head back, the lockdown started, as they called it, lockdown 2.0. And I was caught in a quandary. What do we do now? Do we stay and not do anything, or do we continue to work? And we decided that we were going to work from 10,000 miles away. This picture, by the way, is very close to my mother's house, which is about 150 miles away from where my in-laws lived. And that's where we were stuck. So to give you an idea about what actually happened, the lockdown started in India on, it was effective March 24th. We had all of about maybe 5 hours notice before the lockdown itself started at midnight. So something around 8 o'clock, the prime minister of the country came on TV and announced the lockdown, and it was effective immediately at midnight. So not a lot of planning and preparation. You didn't really get a chance to buy things and be ready for it or anything. There was no public transport. All international flights were canceled. There were absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts about what you could and couldn't do. The bottom line was you stayed in your house. One person would be allowed to go out of the house for about 3 hours maximum. And that was to buy groceries or medical supplies or essentials, as they called it. And at almost every main street corner, there would be a policeman going out and warning you to be back in your house within the next 3 hours. And if they saw you after that, you got a warning. And after the warning, if it happened again, it was a 200 rupees fine. 200 rupees is just under $3. But in India, that would be like, 200 rupees would buy you a couple of really good meals. So it was substantial. The strangest thing about this lockdown was that it kept getting extended. Initially, we said, okay, it's going to be about 3 weeks, but then it kept getting extended. And to this day, it's still in effect with some easing of restrictions. By the way, this picture is a temple pond where I would go on my walks. And typically at this is about 5 o'clock in the evening, there would be about a dozen kids jumping into the pond and frolicking and trying to get over the heat. But this is what it was like. It was just completely silent and beautiful views, but in a way. But as you can imagine, we've been talking for years about what a VUCA world it is. and everything being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, I think this was the perfect VUCA world all of a sudden. A couple of interesting things about what was going on in India in May of this year, about a month after the lockdown was declared. There were about 2,872 deaths. That was at a time when in the US, we were approaching about 10,000 deaths, I think. There were 54,000 positive cases. And this is for a population of 1.3 billion population. That's roughly 5 times the US population. By October, those numbers had jumped to 100, that's early yesterday when I checked, there were about 103,000 deaths and about close to 7 million people who have tested positive. And interestingly, 5.7 million people have recovered from COVID. In contrast, in the US, we now have almost 215,000 deaths, close to 8 million people who have tested positive, about 4.8 million who have recovered. And as I mentioned, our population is only about a fifth of India. So that was kind of interesting, especially in the early days in April and May, when I would be listening to the numbers and seeing what was going on in the US and comparing it to what I was dealing with in India. It was an amazing stark contrast. And my children who live here kept telling me to stay in India as long as possible because it seems like it's a lot safer in India. Interestingly, Kerala, the state that I was in way down in the south, we call it God's own country, with a population of about 34.5 million people. That's comparable to California in population. Population density is much higher. To date, there are 859 deaths. That's compared to about 16,000 in California right now. There are 35,000 people who have recovered or are tested positive, but 148,000 have recovered. So it was quite a contradictory, interesting time to be in what we call the third world, being in India, where things are very different. There is me on my 42-year-old bicycle, actually not mine, it's a bicycle that my wife learned to ride a bike on when she was 7 or 8 years old. And there I was going out with my little backpack and a face mask back in April, where face masks were mandatory. You could not leave your house without a face mask because if your neighbor or the little 10-year-old down the road or somebody you ran into along the way didn't remind you, when you got to the next junction, there was a policeman who told you you're not wearing your face mask and here's a ticket for $200 on the spot, no questions asked. And if it was a second time, it was a 5,000. It jumped from 200 to 5,000 rupees right off the bat. So to hear news from the US where people were debating whether we should use a mask. And in India, it was absolutely wear a mask, wash your hands, and keep social distancing. So very quickly, I had to decide what exactly I could do. What exactly did I have any control over? It's very easy to decide that most things I did not have any control over. And the things I did have or could make work was one that I could telework. Technology had gotten to the point, I thought, where with the Wi-Fi connectivity and things like that in India and the support from our IT staff at the Metropolitan Water District, I could actually telework. The only catch was I would have to start working at 7 o'clock in the evening in India, because that would be 7:30 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning in the US. So we were clearly 12 and a half hours ahead of the US. So I would be starting work at the end of the day. And when everybody said today, they meant yesterday for me almost. But I could use technology and I could continue to work. And so could my wife. She's an electrical engineer at the Metropolitan Water District as well. So she also started working because both of us had our laptops with us. We got tremendous support from our IT department and from human resources, some bosses who were very supportive of that idea. And we thought we'd give it a shot. Let's see what we can do. We could utilize VPN and email and things to keep in touch and keep the work going. The big adjustment was adjusting the sleep schedule. You start working at 7 p.m., work till about 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning. On very hot nights, at night the temperature would drop to 85 in April and May. And then come June, the monsoon started. So I'd be on the phone with somebody or on a Zoom meeting, and somebody'd ask me if I lived very close to a train station because the rains were so heavy and so loud. So adjusting my sleep schedule was quite a challenge. And the other pieces were, how do you stay healthy? I had to get a hold of that. Can I lose some weight? Can I not gain the COVID-19, as they called it? Could I get some exercise and go on a daily walkabout? So it became a routine for me to go for a walk at about 6 when the sun was about to start setting. And this was a view on one of my walkabouts there on the left, palm trees, good setting, nobody outside. And there's an old communist flag over there. That's, by the way, Kerala is the state that in 1958 elected a communist government to power in a democratic election. And currently, there's a communist party that actually governs. And so, that was interesting, being in a very socialized healthcare system, communism or communist government, working within a democratic framework, and everybody being very strongly educated on the dangers of COVID and how to deal with it and distancing and all of that. The other thing I thought I had control over was that I could stay in touch and stay informed, and above all, maintain a positive attitude. Had to keep smiling through all of this, or it would make you cry because of the news that you were hearing from all over. So, couple of things, 4 things I had to do. Number 1, prioritize. What did I need to do? What were my needs at home? Since I was only allowed to go for 2 or 3 hours a day, and then trying not to go out too often because of the fear of catching the COVID and so forth. What could I do to prioritize what the needs were at home, getting the groceries and making things are all set up? Also coordinating the work deadlines. What kind of things needed to happen in a timely manner, given that you didn't have access to all your files, your books, the contacts that you needed and so forth. Mental health, of course, very critical. Having to figure out how to stay sane during all of this. As far as work goes, I had to figure out whom I could collaborate with to get things done effectively. The employee relations manager at work, Dean Rutson there, my assistant, who really kept things going with me being that far away and coordinating things with multiple people that I was working with, particularly trying to deal with employee issues or coaching managers or routine HR issues that my partners were dealing with. And then other people in human resources that I could partner with, like Michelle Haight from our employee relations department. And then starting to think about future plans. What kind of stretch assignments can I take where I could be useful? Because what was going on simultaneously here in Los Angeles was that everybody at work at our headquarters were told not to come into work. So 70% of the people were suddenly working from home as well. We had about a 30% crew that was out in the field, micro teams working on, turning the wrenches and keeping the water flowing for 19 million people in Southern California. So I had to contact managers and find out how HR could help, and then connect them with the right people to get the myriad things that we had to keep going, from recruitments to dealing with employee issues to performance management, keeping people engaged, and doing all of this from 10,000 miles away. As hard as it is when you're face to face, Doing it from that far away was definitely a challenge, but I have to say everybody stepped up to the plate. Everybody changed very quickly to the new normal and figuring out how to use the technology and make it work. And maybe partly because it was great to actually not have to commute and still get work done. Uh, Amongst all this, had to find some entertainment as well. So I started looking at my bucket list and said, okay, there's a lot of books I want to read. My father-in-law had a collection of 3,000 or 4,000 books. So I managed to find some really old books that I always thought, oh, someday I'll read that. And so I managed to snag some of those and find time to read, especially because I was working at night and I still couldn't go to sleep or woke up in the middle of the day. So I started reading up on some, caught a few movies, made some phone calls, connected with a lot of people online. So right there on the right is a collage of University of Laverne College of Business doing a Zoom meeting just to get professors to connect with each other and talk about what's going on. And those kind of things helped, having those kind of communities to work with.
Suresh,
Yes.
did your experience help you when you were working with your colleagues in their adjustment to remote work and COVID-related frustrations?
Yes, definitely, Miller. Hearing from people how they were dealing with things, and then also recognizing how different it was being in India versus in the US, because the whole setup in India is a little different. Even with all this distancing, the community in India, in the neighborhood, somebody would stop by every day. Several people would stop by every day with a piece of fruit or something they cooked, or just checking up on how things are. So there was a real stark contrast with what people here in America were dealing with and what I was dealing with. So it was easier for me to kind of say, well, you know what, this is not bad. It's kind of like a vacation where I can still work, get paid, and still kind of experience India, which, by the way, Miller, I had been gone from India for 40 years. So the last time I was in India during the monsoons was 40 years ago. So a lot of this was completely new experience as well.
Yeah.
So that helped, definitely connecting with others. And then it also helped in terms of dealing with talking about how do I manage the stress of all of this. So some of the things I did was, go on my daily walks for about 45 minutes, get on the bicycle, go out to buy things. That was an interesting adventure. Doing some stretches, being very conscious of my self-talk, what I was saying to myself in kind of keeping my sanity. Having a lot of patience. You couldn't get impatient. Every time I would book a ticket, a week before the flight was due to leave, we'd get a notice that it's been canceled. The lockdown's been extended. The restrictions were different. There were different confinement zones. The one store that I really liked to go to was suddenly off limits for the next 2 weeks because an employee there had tested positive. So you really had to be patient with everything that you were dealing with. Dealing with my family, recognizing that I have 2 boys in America, and one in Pasadena and South Pasadena, and the other in San Diego, and don't know when we're going to see them. We just have to be patient about it. Breathing exercises helped. Keeping a balanced diet helped. I started on my walks taking pictures of different things as I saw, things that I noticed that I would have never stopped and looked and smelled the roses sort of thing when I came for my 2 or 3 week vacation. And interestingly, that first picture there is about $10 worth of vegetables, fruits and vegetables on one of my walkabouts, go about buying things. And for $10, you could get all that. That would last you for a good 3 or 4 days. And everything is fresh.
Tell us about your breakfast blog on Facebook. I see that here. And
oh, that picture on the right. Yeah. So on the first day of the lockdown, on a whim, I just put a picture of my breakfast with the newspaper headlines showing and said, so this is day 1 of lockdown, and here's what I'm getting for breakfast, and blah, blah. And the second day, I started getting messages from people on Facebook asking me, hey, so what did you have for breakfast today? And so I said, look, I'm committing to put my breakfast blog up for the next 21 days. And so for the first 21 days of the lockdown, my wife and my mother-in-law, who I call the kitchen goddesses, created something different for breakfast every day. And I started putting pictures of the breakfast, including healthy eating with a piece of fruit, some orange, tea, and the headlines of the day. And I had a following about 150 to 200 likes every day, comments on it. Huge that helped to kind of keep in touch with a lot of people all over the world and understand what was going on in their area with the COVID-19 situation. And it also helped a lot of people to vent about things that were going on. So it was in a way kind of a social media with a little humor and discussion that was actually helping deal with that. So the third thing was communication. I figured was very important right off the bat. It was very important to stay connected and equally important to have credible information. You could get some from Facebook, other things from Twitter, from emails with friends. The Metropolitan Water District, every Monday, they would put out something called the Water Talk that talked about 3 things that are important that are going on in the company. So that helped to stay connected with a lot of things that were going on all over the world and at the workplace.
Yeah.
And because definitely there were a lot of rumors, there was a lot of anger, there were opinions, and you had to sift through all that to figure out what was real, what was not, what you could deal with and what you could not. Tapping into personal contacts was very important. Every day we would have on WhatsApp a meeting with my boys. That's Mukund on the left, who's an engineer at DWP, and Keshav on the right, who's a federal defender down in San Diego. So keeping in touch with them every day, face to face, and hearing what was going on in their lives and their take on what was going on with COVID. And of course, the real depressing thing was when they would keep telling me, stay in India as long as you can, things are really bad in America. That was baffling to me, considering that we are kind of the leader in everything. Everything I held US in esteem for, we were obviously failing. And it was very obvious that in India, and particularly in Kerala, they were doing a much better job of educating people, keeping distancing, and keeping the numbers down, especially the deaths. I mean, as late as June, the number of deaths among 34.5 million people in Kerala were in the single digits. It was creeping up from 6 to 7 to 9. When it hit 11, it was big news. It's double digits. Now they've crept up a little more. Still under 1,000 deaths, but still. But you had to be very selective in what you were allowing to influence you, because otherwise you could go crazy, especially hearing some of the stories, the anecdotal, what was going on. Using the newspapers, listening to the television, watching the television, phone calls, face-to-face, all of that helped. I came to the US on an International House Scholarship. So there were about 200 people from all over the world that we all keep in touch still. And we had this little Zoom meetings that happened every few Saturdays. And so it connected with people from all over the world and hear what was going on in their neck of the woods with relation to COVID, and reminisce, talk, spread some rumors, catch up on gossip, and all that kind of helped keep your sanity as well. The fourth thing was maintaining relationships and realizing how important that was. The Metropolitan General Manager, Jeff Keitlinger, would do a town hall meeting, and he would talk about MWD's COVID-19 response, the current state of water in Southern California, future challenges. I kept up on Twitter with a lot of senior management. Erwin Jankovic, who's here, would send me information about what was going on. All those kind of little things, from LA to Sacramento to Washington, D.C., it helped you stay in touch with what was going on and not get completely bogged down in the fact that we had complete uncertainty, didn't know when we were going to get out of there. There were no international flights. There were repatriation flights, and there were so many restrictions on how you could leave on those. But all those things with daily chats, the Zoom meetings, the ISPI board would have meetings, and Vince would very subtly nudge me that it would be a good thing if I could attend. And so at 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, I was on the Zoom calls, and just connecting to people, familiar faces, people that you're familiar with, knowing that life is still going on, kind of helped you maintain your sanity and stay grounded. Keeping your boss informed in this whole thing is very, very important. I was very lucky to have very supportive bosses who understood the situation and kind of worked with me and my wife on continuing to do work. And imagine her as an engineer having to do engineering work, checking drawings and making corrections and calculations and whatever engineers do. That was good. The other part of maintaining relationships was that I got a chance to go back through old photographs and thumbing through the old-fashioned photo albums and finding pictures. And there was a picture of my wedding day, and it was interesting. In that picture, including my younger brother, are no more. Though there are only 3 people in that picture who are still alive. So going back and reminiscing and kind of, even though they were painful, going through some of those memories kind of helped you keep the sanity and keep going. So this was the situation on the ground there. And where do we go from here? And we really had to start thinking about, okay, how do we deal with the ambiguity? You had to believe that there is light ahead. Would that be in 2021? Would that be in January? Or would it be in July? We don't know. We had to keep looking for that and had to keep looking for a way to get back to the US, because I kept thinking, okay, this is a dream. This is unbelievable. This is a nightmare in some ways, but it's going to end and I'll get back to Agoura Hills, California, and things will be hunky-dory. And eventually, on August 15th, which interestingly was Indian Independence Day, we managed to get a ticket on a repatriation flight. So there's my wife and my mother-in-law and myself all dressed up to board an Air India flight back to the United States. Very strict guidelines. You can see from this picture that you get on the plane and there's a packet of food sitting on the seat. That's your food for the next 16 hours. It was a 44-hour flight for us getting back to the United States. We had to fly from Trivandrum to Kochi, Kochi to Delhi, Delhi to San Francisco, and then catch rented a car in San Francisco and drove down to Los Angeles. Interestingly, I got to the Enterprise rent-a-car place and they told me that my driver's license had expired a week ago and I had not noticed. But I managed to renew my license online and about an hour later get a car and drive down to LA. I have to tell you, it was a beautiful sight when I looked out the window and saw the San Francisco coast. It was such a beautiful sight looking out the window and seeing America after all those years. But recognizing that we have to change the way that we live. Everything has changed. Even after we get a vaccine and things move on to whatever the new normal is, we're going to be in a different world. We have to learn some things from all of this. Some of it including what's really truly important to you. What is really, really important in terms of clothing, in terms of food, in terms of people, in terms of the way we live, what we prioritize. Those were some huge lessons for me in this process in terms of where we go from here. I found a picture of my bride the day we got married. And that was interesting to just go back and think and say, you know what? I need to make some very just, fair, and ethical and principled adjustments to what's important and how I'm going to live going forward. And this was something that I talked a lot with many of my friends as well. Scott Weimer here, we've discussed this many times. We talked about what does the future hold for us and what we do now and how is all that going to impact future generations, our children and their children, and what we're leaving behind for the world to inherit. We really have to make some very informed, wise choices for now and for the future. That's a picture of me with my mom, who's 83 years old. I left her behind in India. And I was trying to ask her, do you want to come back with me? And she was like, no, from everything I read in the paper, I'm better off in India. So leaving her behind with one of my cousins who's taking care of her, those were choices you make, and you really had to decide what's important at this moment and going forward. Yeah. You really had to embrace the fact that we now have to take on the right attitude in terms of the way that we live and we move forward. It has to be based on the right values. It cannot be, whether to wear a mask to protect myself, but it's also for everybody else around you, that you're going to do something. There's a community, I think, is one of the things I realized in India was the community involvement in your life sometimes is very intrusive, but it's also very helpful in many ways. We also have to have the right leadership. We can't have people who are unethical, immoral, and unprincipled leading us, or saying one thing and doing something else. So in India, they always say there's a Sanskrit phrase, Satyameva Jayate, which means truth always prevails. So no matter what you do, the truth is going to be the truth. Whatever facts you try to make up, whatever lies you try to weave, the truth will prevail. And this is a huge wake-up call, in my opinion, to all of us to think about the future. This, by the way, is Kovalam Beach, about 10 minutes from my wife's house, from the town where I grew up in. Beautiful beach, nobody out there. There used to be beat cricket on the beach, and there's a sign still lying out there, but I managed to sneak out there with a friend of mine and take a few pictures one day. But we really have to think about having the right attitude, the right values, and the right leadership moving forward to get us to where we are going to get to. So those are just in a nutshell some of my lessons, some of my experiences. By the way, this is a picture of Union Station and Chinatown behind us, kind of looking out from my office. And I thought it was very interesting that this picture looks very murky, but that's kind of what the future looks like for the time being. But I'm sure that the sun's going to come through. We'll get past this, but hopefully we've learned some lessons that we'll take forward from this experience. With that, I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments.
Great. Thank you, Suresh. Truly inspiring. I have a few questions here. I'm going to read them to you, and we'll kind of work through them as we can. Obviously, when you were interacting with the folks at work, it was work related, but your work is human resources. So I'm assuming that you were coaching people on how to coach people, and the usual things that HR people do.
We were dealing with, yes, we were coaching. I was coaching some managers who were dealing with some difficult times with some employees, things that started before. But also in light of working remotely, there was a whole different set of rules and approaches that you had to take in terms of managing performance, in terms of getting work done, getting to work, people work collaboratively.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of face-to-face on Zoom and Microsoft Teams, as well as emails and texts back and forth, or manager going out to meet with somebody and then would text me a quick question, and not realizing that it was 2 a.m. for me, but I was awake, responding back to them and trying to give them some feedback on how they might approach that. But also maintaining, HR rules and laws, that we're not breaking any laws in doing this, that we uphold the contracts and agreements that we have with our bargaining unit. So it was definitely challenging. And I think if I was here working remotely, it would have been very similar. So after about the first month, Miller, I think the fact that I was 10,000 miles away kind of fell away. It became, everybody is talking like this now. They're all on Zoom and Teams and so forth. So let's figure out a way to make it work. And leaning on the people here that who could help you, that was very critical. You realize that you're not a one-man show. It takes a lot of people to make things happen. I'd have to call Urban and ask him, can you send something to somebody? Or what do you think about this? Can you help?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Better.
Amazing. Another question here from Vince.
Really have to work collaboratively.
Sure. Professionally, any advice for dealing with folks in La La Land who refuse to wear masks or socially distance themselves? Where are all the people in your pictures?
Yes. This morning I just got a call that my wife's cousin, who was in Dubai, was planning to retire next month and move back to India, just passed away, succumbed to COVID. They had a maid who worked in another house as well. And that's where they suspect the COVID came into their house. So in 5 days ago, he was perfectly fine. And today he's gone. So it's really something that we have to recognize, that this is a virus that we really don't know everything about yet. It's something that's very dangerous. If you have people who say, I don't need a mask, or ridicule you for wearing a mask, this is one of the protections that we have. It's not to say that it's going to completely prevent you from getting COVID, but distancing, washing your hands, and wearing a mask. And in India, they called it break the chain. And there were signs all over the place. Every 20 minutes on TV, you'd see a celebrity or a politician come on and tell people that. It seemed like people there were more willing to listen to it and accept it and do something. And I find it baffling that us, who are considered more educated, better off financially, greatest country in the world, and we refuse to face the reality. I wish people would wake up and follow that advice.
Yeah, I share your thoughts on that. Comment here from Kathleen. I'm really impressed with the extent of your reflection on the new challenges and how you address them. And I have to share her comment on this too, because I am also impressed with this. You know, I wonder if being in a different setting has helped you to you know, pull away from the immediate and think more deeply on, as you said, what you want to do with your life going forward. What are the important things in life? I get the sense that not many people here are doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Having lived in America for the last 40 years, you get lulled into thinking all the things that we hear and the propaganda, and we believe that we are one of the greatest countries in the world. I still think that that's true. But being in circumstances, seeing people in India, 80% of the people are day laborers. They depend on what they make every day to make a living. So about the third or fourth day, most of them were completely broke. The whole community had to come together to help those people survive. We had people that we would give money to or call into, just so you're not giving it away. They don't, to help them with their dignity, tell them, hey, can you do this for me? Can you get such and such? And then give them some money in return. So you kind of recognize how much we have and how much we sometimes don't appreciate it. Seeing how difficult life can be for people. I mean, the creature comforts that we have are amazing.
I agree.
But interesting too, in India, the technology, I mean, the Wi-Fi, for about $10 a month, the Wi-Fi was even more stable and better than what I could get here. So there are things that other people in the world are catching up on, and it's high time that we appreciate it and truly paid attention to it and valued it.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's a sad commentary that even though we're the richest country in the world with more technology than anybody else, we're still struggling with how to address this pandemic, and hopefully we'll come up with these things. I want to transition from that to our future ISPI activities. We've got about another 4 or 5 minutes here before we end our meeting.
Miller, it looked like Irwin had a question. Do you want to give him a quick minute?
Sure. Irwin?
I actually had two. One is, did you learn anything about dealing with American bureaucracy while dealing with Indian bureaucracy? And two, how old were you when you learned how to spell your last name?
I was 13. Till then, I was just Suresh R. But the other one, so I actually contacted the American Embassy right off the bat. I let them know that I was stuck there. And I was very impressed that almost every week I would get an email from the US Embassy or the US Consulate in Chennai, and they would let me know what was going on. There were not a lot of help beyond that, except that they were telling me, like, you're stuck. You don't have any flights. You can't go anywhere. But here's some advice. These are the things you should do. When things do free up, we'll let you know. The Indian bureaucracy really stepped up. I mean, I had very different opinions of Indian bureaucracy. But in this case, I mean, we were getting calls the first 2 weeks, almost every day, from either the health department or the police, checking on us, making sure we were okay, but also letting us know that we came in from another country, so we need to isolate ourselves, maintain quarantine, and be careful. That was quite impressive, and how much they have evolved over the years. And then I think, sometimes give too much credence to this notion of freedom. In times like these, I think sometimes some freedoms have to be curtailed, and the police politely, but sometimes very firmly, took matters into their hands and made it very clear that this is very serious. You got to stay where you stay and follow the rules. We somehow seem to have a false notion or false sense of what that exactly means.
Yeah.
I know that's not a complete answer, but Miller, back to you.
Yeah, I share your thoughts on that. I want to talk a little bit about our upcoming meetings. We're going to continue our COVID-19 challenge webinars on the first Tuesday of the month through November, December, and into January. And we have some very exciting presentations coming. We also are changing our membership fee structure starting on November 1st. We are now going to have a virtual membership since we can't meet in person and don't want to risk that. Our virtual membership is going to be $40 a year. If you want to take in our webinars, they'll be $10 per event. So think about this. We've got 12 of these or more a year. The yearly membership starts to look really attractive very quickly there. But we'll leave that up to you. We are also participating in the Talent Summit that is coming up online here in LA on the 21st of October. Is that correct, Vincent? Yeah, 21st. And we'll be presenting a couple of case studies to kind of illustrate what us training guys and gals do when faced with a business challenge. And I think you might find that interesting. You can find more information about that on their website. We are just a couple of minutes away from ending our meeting.
Miller, you might add the Friday roundtables and the diversity series that.
Thank you. Thank you. The roundtable meetings are the first Friday of every month, and those are also conducted on Zoom. And on the last Friday of the month, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion fireside chat hosted by Renee Freeman. And those have been really interesting for the last two that have gone on. And I think you'll find them to be worth your time and effort to eat lunch and learn something very interesting. That's about it. We're just about out of time. Any other thoughts? Vincent, go ahead.
I just might add, if you decide to take the plunge and join ISPI SoCal, all the meetings we mentioned are included in the membership fee. So in other words, the diversity ones, the Friday morning ones, the Tuesday ones, it's all, you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, just attend.
Tom, I think has a question.
Well, it's another event. I mean, Suresh, thank you for telling us what it was like to live through a disaster from two countries. Just a reminder, we're due for another earthquake. Next Thursday, the 15th, is the Great Shakeout. Find your local city's event. Take part in it, because comparing notes with my fellow CERT team, everybody scrambled to get toilet paper and stuff for the COVID disaster.
Yeah.
Why didn't you have the masks and things like that anyway?
Yeah.
So please get ready for the next disaster.
Amen. Good advice, Tom. Thank you. Okay, folks, we are approaching the end of our recorded interview. I want to thank you all for joining us. We've had some great comments from Suresh and some really good questions from all of you. Look forward to seeing you in a month's time. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye. All right, we're going to end that, and
thank you.
we're going to end our meeting. Thank you, everyone.